the 15th and 16th of April, the 80th Goodwood members meeting arrived at last. It had seemed like it was an endless winter of not much going on car-wise. It's always great to be back at Goodwood, and the 80th members meeting was the first event of Goodwood 75, in which Goodwood celebrates so many anniversaries, the 75th anniversary of the circuit opening being the most important. And the 80th members meeting saw the return of the Edwardian monsters for the SF Edge trophy, such as this, the Beast of Turin. It's Duncan Pittaway's car. It's actually a 1911 Fiat S76 with 28 litres of power. This is a very special Jaguar XK120, as it's the first Jaguar that ever saw the finish line at Le Mans. And that was back in 1950. And of course the Goodwood paddock is home to so many beautiful cars for 2 days. Take these two Ferraris, the 250 TR of Mike Malone and I hope I pronounced this correctly, the Sega Ferrari. The Jim Clark Trophy race was the first race we managed to watch, and we were standing at the chicane. It was a one-make race for Lotus Cortina Mark 1s. The Lotus Cortina was made famous, of course, by Jim Clark winning the 1964 British Saloon Car Championship. Famously photographed, of course, at Madgwick Corner, lifting the inside front wheel. It was a two-driver race, and I have to say the grid was made up of many famous names from the world of touring car racing, and the fast guys were lapping at over 95 miles per hour average. And it was Alex Brundle who took the lead on the first lap from 5th place on the grid, going on the outside. But he didn't hold that lead because it was Goodwood regular and touring car star Andrew Jordan that won by 4.5 seconds. It was a bit of an emotional win for Andrew Jordan, as Craig Green was down to drive one of his cars at the weekend, but he had sadly died the week before in an accident, and Craig had actually driven the very car that Andrew won in last year at the members meeting, so a bit of a bittersweet victory. And this is the SF Edge trophy for Edwardian racing cars and aero engine specials from the early 20th century. Selwyn Francis Edge was a racing driver and a record breaker and was born in 1868. He was the winner of the Gordon Bennett Trophy in 1902 in his Napier, and he was really the first chap to realise the positive publicity that could be gained from racing cars. I love the fact that these early Edwardian racers had no frame of reference, so they really do look like a collection of wacky racers. There's no agreed approach to aerodynamics, and generally they just thought bigger engines, the faster you'll go. And most of these cars are powered by ex-World War I aircraft engines. The Saturday had seen a tremendous battle between Julian Majube's Sunbeam and Mark Walker's Dirac. And on Sunday, it seemed that Julian may have it all his own way in his Sunbeam Indianapolis car. The 1916 Sunbeam has a 4.9 litre engine and has quite a varied history. It was once owned by the Duke of Grafton, but actually also spent time in an Aylesbury scrapyard. There goes Duncan in his Fiat. He says it's not very good at going around corners. Followed by the Moors, and then the white Blitzen Benz with Ben Collins at the wheel.
Yesterday, he knows that car's right behind him again. Can Mark Walker do what he did yesterday?
And yet again, Mark Walker just pipped Julian Majube's Sunbeam at the finish line, beating him by 0.15 of a second, I believe.
But I think the Fiat is just about going to be able to hold on.
Bonhams were holding a sale, and it's always interesting to have a perusal of their lots and what's on display in their marquee. This Healey 100 looked great with its sign-written achievements on its flanks. It had had a great period racing history over in New Zealand, racing in the 1954 New Zealand Grand Prix against single-seaters. Even the V16 BRM was on the same grid. It was restored in 2017 with bills amounting to £80,000, and it was estimated to sell for £140,000, but sadly it didn't find a buyer. Then we managed to catch the Nuvalari trophy that was for cars that raced up to 1939. It was just a wonderful grid of Alfa Monzas, BMW 328s, Talbos and Fraser Nashes. It's easy to forget now Goodwood has been putting on these race meetings for decades that it used to be a real rarity to get a grid as good as this together. Yes, the VSCC is home to these cars, and you'd see one or two Talbos and Astons, but you'd never see 3 Alfa Monzas, a couple of Maseratis and 5 Astons on the same grid. It was one of those Astons, the Red Dragon speed model, driven by Richard Bradley, that established a strong lead. It was being driven ferociously quickly, and it was chased all the way by Gareth Burnett in the always rapid Alta 2-seater. I'd recently been driven around the circuit on a press day by William Medcalf in one of his Bentleys, and I think it's the same Bentley, the 4.5 litre that he's driving in this race, and he was unbelievably quick. I could not believe a 1920s car could feel so fast. It was like something 30 years younger. And what I find unbelievable is that he's only in the middle of the pack, so the front runners in this race must be really not hanging around and pushing and pushing and pushing. And there's John Paulson getting very racy in the number 25 Talbot in a glorious gaggle of cars. Headlights ablaze to warn other drivers that he's coming through to lap them. That's Bradley in the Aston Martin. The familiar apple green colours of the Talbots that are sounding very crisp and often do very well in the pre-war races. I have to say, one of the highlights of the members' meeting is choosing which of the many street food outlets to eat from. The majority of them are housed in the food hall, which in true Goodwood style is decorated in this wonderful rural spring setting with daffodils and hay bales everywhere. To be honest, if you have family members who are not so interested in racing, they could sit here and eat and drink and listen to the music and still have a really enjoyable day. As most people know, the members' meeting has an inter-house competition, which is a bit old school, quite literally. Everyone from the drivers to the youngest ticket holders are given a membership to a house, and around the circuit there's various competitions from skittles to archery to welly wangling, and at the end of the weekend the winning house is presented with a shield. Here are 2 Fraser Nash Le Mans replicas entered for the Tony Gaze trophy. The nearest one to camera is driven by Patrick Blakeney Edwards, I believe. And these Alfas were a real feast for the eyes. 3 8C Monzas. I think this is Chris Mann's closest to us, 2.6, and next to that, the white one is a 2.3 Monza. And then the British contingent, the Aston Martin Ulsters. These are being run by the 10/10ths team. I remember Nick Mason telling my father that if he had to get rid of all his cars and only keep one, that one would be the Aston Martin Ulster, as he believed it was the best all-rounder and a real joy to drive. Now, this is the start of the Salvadori Cup for sports racing cars from 1955 to 1960. It was another tremendous race made particularly exciting by Shane Brereton in the Cooper Monaco, and he drove like a demon from the back of the grid. He scythed through the grid up to 10th place from last in one lap, and then was up to 4th, and he was really pushing and pushing all the way, finding gaps which I believe probably weren't really there. But Martin Stretton was leading from pole in his beautiful Lister Nobly. There was a safety car period which sadly broke up the action. A beautiful yellow and black Ferrari 250 TR of Mike Malone, looking wonderful amongst the yellow daffodils. But Stretton still remained dominant at the front when the racing got going again. The unpainted car there, which is growling away with its V8 engine, that's the Sadler Chevrolet Mark II of Julian Majube. James Thorpe, who actually won last year quite easily, had an exciting race. He was also at the back of the grid and made his way right up to the leaders, and he was carving his way through the pack as well in his lovely flat iron Lister. And there goes Shane Brereton carving his way through the grid in the ex-Sterling Moss Cooper Monaco. James Wood is out there in the Lotus 15 that the late Robert Brooks made such a name for himself in. And I'll never grow tired of watching a D-Type Jag being driven with the commitment that Gary Pearson shows around Goodwood. The white Lotus Climax 15, that's Michael Gans, and he really was having a fight with Brereton to get to the final podium position. Martin Stretton was chased all the way by David Hart in his Lister Costin, both of them battling out, and after the race Stretton said he was having problems with his brakes, so a couple more laps and David Hart may well have caught him. The last race we caught was the Moss Trophy, which was for closed cockpit cars from 1958 to 1962. Such a beautiful grid of Ferraris, Jaguars and Lotuses. I believe it's actually more varied than the Revival TT. There was even an XK120 in there, which was looking a bit of an old girl in comparison to the E-Types, but evidently it ran in the 60s with a 3.8 engine, which it's running at the moment. And of course, being closed cockpit, it has to have its hood up. And it has a rack and pinion steering, not the old original steering box. Alex Buncombe was out in front in his E-Type, and he was battling alongside James Cottingham in the Cobra. The Cobra is one of the early Shelby examples with the smaller 260 V8 engine. I think that's about sort of like 4.3 litres. At one point in its life it had the larger V8 engine, but it's now back to the original size. The Cobra has obviously not quite got the brakes of the E-Type, but it sure has got some grunt, which just makes it easier for Cottingham to pull away from Buncombe's E-Type along the straights. The Moss Trophy, obviously named after the great man himself, Sir Stirling Moss, who won the Tourist Trophy at Goodwood in 1960 and 61 in a Ferrari 250 GT short wheelbase. That's Tom Alexander in his beautiful Aston Martin DB4 GT. It's a shame you don't see those cars up at the front because they are so pretty. The red E-Type is the 1962 car of William Paul, and another beautiful Aston DB4 GT. Paul Woolmer is in that Austin Healey 3000 in the works colours, and it looks like it's got a rally spec actually with the multiple spotlights on the front. And that's the Corvette C1 of Peter James, a big American car. I've actually quite grown to like those, and it's a cheap way into a grid such as this. So it was Cottingham that took the win in the Cobra from Buncombe's E-Type, and it was Ollie Bryant in a similar E-Type down in third place. So, as the earliest car got ready to leave, the 1903 Mercedes, so did we. Yet again, it had been a fabulous day of racing, as well as just a great day out for the family. And there's the 1909 Blitzen Benz proudly showing its laurels for coming third in the SF Edge Trophy. And where else but Goodwood would you see a Ferrari 250 GTO just casually leaving at the end of a day's racing? I do highly recommend going. Yes, you do have to become a member of the Goodwood Fellowship to qualify to buy tickets, but it does seem to be quite reasonable. And it's always a delight to see what's still in the car park as we leave. And there was this charming
Hillman Imp in the eye-catching blue and white colour scheme. And then for us, it was the long journey home to Norfolk.